Good day. In this video, I'd like to talk about some deadly mistakes in your elevator pitch. And when I say deadly, I really mean that it's pretty much game over if you do any of these in job interviews. And this is based on some experiences I had with various candidates. Okay, the first one I'd like to talk about here is I once had someone, a senior technical PM with Microsoft, and we did a role play session. And asked them, tell me about yourself. And what they did was to perform a word-for-word readout of their CV. So basically, they had their CV in front of them. They didn't put it on camera, and they were reading pretty much. And they were wondering why weren't they interviewing well. Okay, so this is a no-no. Okay, this there's various combinations. Like this was an extreme case. Still for a very senior type of role at a reputable company. But most of the time what candidates will do will present a readout, a life story, so to speak. You would speak about each and every experience that you had in your career without highlighting anything interesting about you. But if you do perform a readout of your CV during a job interview, you cannot expect to pass it, right? So rather you should focus on the most interesting highlights from your professional career that would make the most sense for the job that you're applying for, right? Okay, luckily for this guy, he did improve his interviewing skills and he eventually landed a very good role with Capital One. Okay, the second thing I like to talk about here, and again I'm referring to deadly mistakes in job interviews, would be another example of one of my clients who was a non-tech or technical PM, I think they were. Anyway, they were responsible for a fintech app at their bank, and basically this was the main highlight in their career, and they wanted to pitch it well. And they started something on the lines of, within that elevator pitch, we decided to trial it on 10,000 customers of our bank. Okay, and then he went on with this elevator pitch. He was interviewing with a senior manager. And the senior manager realized that, hey, this guy is not as senior as he looks, as he tries to make it look in their elevator pitch. So they challenged them, hey, why did you choose 10,000 and not 3,000, not 30,000 customers of your bank for that fintech app? And basically the candidate, they were bluffing about they didn't have that power to decide the number of customers to be trialed, but because they wanted to keep it their way, they maintained their reasoning for the rest of the conversation, for the rest of the back and forth. And basically the senior manager asked them challenge and follow-up questions exactly on the same thing for 45 minutes straight, which was the duration of the job interview. Okay, so basically the candidate bluffed on some responsibilities during the elevator pitch. They maintained their position and therefore they failed the job interview because the hiring manager became suspicious and they stayed suspicious for the remainder of the conversation. This was at Amazon. Okay, they did not pass that final loop, but they were invited for a subsequent loop a few weeks later, and they did get the job then. Okay, so my point is that even though you might be tempted to bluff, even your elevator pitch, because the first impression, and you would think that, hey, people realize that, hey, they might be bluffing and that's acceptable. No, it's not. So stay away from bluffing because it doesn't work. The third deadly mistake I like to talk about here is a scenario that so many of candidates unfortunately fall trap into. That is, you prepare the perfect possible pitch, the perfect possible story bank. You revised it, it sounds amazing. You could AI reward it, you could prepare it to be storytelling with metrics, you could steal it for someone else, whatever. But the problem is that a good number of candidates prepare their answers on paper, and the first time they speak those answers is during job interviews. Okay, and what happens is that if you never speak your answer before your job interview, I can assure you that it will sound incredibly different when compared to anything you would have, you would think it would sound like. And it's the classic scenarios, whether if it's AI rewarded, whether you are, well-intentioned or not, the problem is not going to sound good when you're going to speak it out in a job interview. And why do I say it's deadly? Why is game over when you say that? Because I know that people who do this don't do this only for their elevator pitch, but do for their whole story bank. It's something I call the half prepped candidate. And what happens if you give an elevator pitch that's not, doesn't sound like you, sound as if it's someone else, you give subsequent answers that don't sound like you, that something is wrong with this candidate, you can imagine that, it's not going to end up well for you. Okay, long story short, role play what you prepare on paper, because it will sound a lot more different than you expected to. And you don't have to pay someone to role play these things. You could also record yourself, or you could simply speak them out loud to see how they sound to you. Okay, because if they don't sound good to you, it won't sound good to an interviewer as well. Okay, but the half-prepped candidate is something hugely underestimated in these job interviews. And I even went as far as to recommend people not to prepare for job interviews, to give spontaneous answers, simply because if you half prep it, it will sound boring, but it will not end up well. Okay, and the fourth thing I want to talk about here is another monumental mistake. In my experience, and I do this for more than 5 years, I could probably count the number of candidates who are able to read their elevator pitch from their computer screens and without me catching them on the thousand of one hand. So not more than 5 candidates who could do this so well that I couldn't catch them. And vast majority of them were for director level roles and the likes. Okay, so my point is that if you choose to read your answers from your computer screen during job interviews, you should know that this is harder than most candidates realize. Cheating in behavioral interviews is much more complicated than you would ever think. And what happens is, again, the topic of this video is deadly interviewing mistakes, when it's game over. And the problem with this, if they spot that you are reading from a computer screen, the one problem would be you're not genuine. Okay, if you cannot deliver, if you're reading from a computer screen, you might sound as not genuine, and trust is a huge problem in job interviews. In a job interview, trust is earned, not given to candidates. You should be super careful about. And the other big problem is that for an interviewer, if you as a candidate cannot think on your feet and deliver an introductory statement by yourself, that tells a lot about your ability to interview and your persona and your level of performance, or who you are going into a job interview. So in my experience, this never ends up well if you read answers from your computer screen during job interviews, except, yes, I had a couple of people who were able to read pretty much any answer they wanted. Some of them even book coaching sessions with me for this sole purpose, to see how it works, how well that would work. But again, these are exceptions, not the rule. So I would advise you very much against reading from a script during job interviews. You could keep some bullet points if you want. You could keep a cheat sheet, which you could also be upfront with them in the beginning of the job interview. But raising suspicion and raising trust issues so early on in your interview process is a deadly mistake that you should avoid. Okay, so I hope you found this useful, and thank you very much for watching.